Hi folks. This is just kind of a timeline of photo history. Again, it's a long view. It's not anything in detail. And it's just to try and give you a sense of where things happen in our history. So on this side over here, we start with 1830. And over here is our present day. So we're basically 1930, 2030. We have about 200 years of photography. And I'm going to work with abbreviations here. I'll probably publish a little code to which ones are which. But we're going to start off with this thing called early experiments. And I'm just going to mark some things down here. So our early experiments are going to fit in the timeline right over here between about 1830 and 1850. There wasn't any real practical photography going on. There was research and development, and there was quite a few people who were trying to get on board ahead of somebody else. Now, the first thing that happened beyond early experiments was portraits for the masses. So I'm just going to abbreviate that with PORT, and that's going to be on the timeline right about here. Portraits has never stopped. Portraits is viable today as it was in 1850, but I'm just putting it down here between 1840 and 1870 because it was so novel. It was such an interesting thing that people hadn't had before, and they really appreciated it. Number 3 is going to be abbreviated TRAV, and it stands for armchair travel. And this was our Western outreach, but people in Europe were going down and taking pictures of the Holy Lands and even taking trips into China and Japan, which were recently opened. They were kind of like forbidden for a while in history. So travel photography, there was a market for stereography, stereo slides that showed faraway places. So first we have early experiments, and then we have commercial photography. Both of these are driven by money. They're not driven by art. But we have art coming up next, and photography had a hard time being accepted as an art form. There were many art museums that would not put a photograph in the art museum. Artists were actually trying to blackball photographers. They felt threatened. They didn't want to lose their position as image makers to a camera. So they called them cold scientific apparatus, and they lumped them together with telescopes and microscopes, other forms of things that had lenses in them. Number 5 is the first practical photography for the common man. Sorry, I didn't show it to you. It's Kodak. Okay, George Eastman, K-D-O-K, K-O-D-A-K, sorry, Kodak. George Eastman invented a little handheld camera which allowed people not scientists and not chemists and not specialists, but everybody to be able to take pictures. Now, that sparked a big problem. So I'm going to just put PS on this sticker. PS is photo secession. And there were many very well-trained art photographers who did not want to be lumped into this snapshot category. So they developed some aesthetic rules that separated the looks from the snapshot to a handmade or a handcrafted kind of photograph. A lot of blurry pictures, a lot of soft focus in that. Now that's going to change. Right around 1920, that's going to change, about 1920s. And I've just put down F64 here, but if I look carefully, there are other terms that are written on there, okay? Modernism is one, New Vision is another, Precisionist is another. So there's a revolt against soft focus photography, and now we're celebrating a sharp image again. Ansel Adams and Edward Weston are in this group. This is such a long word for such a short thing. S standing for surrealism. That hits between the wars, between World War I and World War II. We had these kind of like nightmare visions, kind of like bad dream sorts of things. And some of the photographers got involved in that as well. Number 9 is the age of the photo magazine. And this you cannot underplay. No TV yet. People were not watching TV, but they were running home once a week. They were running home to the mailbox to see who could get Life magazine out of the mailbox first. It was filled with pictures of the news. If you were a photojournalist, your highest aspiration would be to work for Life magazine or Look magazine, the Saturday Evening Post, Time magazine, Fortune magazine. All of them demanded very accomplished photojournalism and art photography. And of course, then there were advertisements that needed pictures of products that were going to be marketed. Number 10, well, right around mid-century, we had Jackson Pollock come along with something called non-objective painting, and several other fine artists went along with him. So there were photographers who also went with him. Non-objective means that the picture doesn't have a traditional subject matter. The artist is just celebrating the design and principles and the elements of art. So some photos got to be pretty abstract and pretty hard to understand for some people. But the bigger scene, the bigger art world, they were celebrating and they were thinking that this was actually one of the high points in the history of art, was non-objective photography. Number 11 is the 60s, the big 60s shake-up. We call it a shake-up because 1920s shook up the photo world, and the 1960s really shook up the photo world. From about 1920 to around 1950, F-64 school, or modernism, had dominated, and it wouldn't allow for many other people to get in there. It was always the dominant form of art. In the 60s, we had Jerry Uelsmann, who was putting together pictures in the darkroom. He didn't know what they were going to look like until after he finished working with them. And we had Diane Arbus, and we had some other people that were doing, Robert Frank. They were doing things that were so different from the traditional F-64 aesthetic that it was just like, you know, the 60s was the time when we questioned everything, questioned authority, protests, we had civil rights, Vietnam protests. It was just a big, crazy time, and that affects art. The context affects art. So the last one I've got here, I'm going to put an NT on it, but that stands for New Topographics, NT, but I've also put down contemporary. Art historians and photo historians really can't classify the movements of the last 50 years. They're too new, they're too fresh. People are testing things out. They don't know who's going to emerge as a keeper and who's going to sift down through the sands of time and kind of disappear. So I hope this helps you out. Looks like we lost our early experiments. I hope this helps you out, and I will take a picture of this and put it up online. So happy studying.